All right, if you are just joining us, this is Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA, Africa's largest TV network. And as part of our agenda setting series, we shall today discuss the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And of course, to set the tone for the conversation, here is our correspondent Leah Khartoum Babatunde with this report.
The Buhari administration, in its first tenure, had a daunting economic experience. It mounted the saddle in the wake of falling global oil prices that diminished earnings, and ultimately, Nigeria entered a recession in 2016. These get government taking effective steps to reflate the economy as Nigeria paid her way out of recession, returned to growth trajectory in 2017, and came up with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the ERGP. It's an ambitious medium-term plan designed to diversify the economy, restore economic growth, create jobs, empower the youths, develop the human capital and infrastructure, improve business environment, and bring about technological growth. Nigeria accounts for nearly 20% of Africa's GDP and about 75% of the West African economy. It is ranked as the 27th largest economy in the world in terms of nominal GDP and the 22nd largest in terms of purchasing power parity. However, oil revenues contribute to two-thirds of the nation's revenues, whereas oil alone contributes about 9% to the GDP. President Muhammadu Buhari has identified fighting corruption, increasing security, tackling unemployment, diversifying the economy, enhancing climate resilience, and boosting the living standards of Nigerians as main policy priorities his government seeks to continue to pursue in his second term up till 2023. Since Nigeria's emergence from recession, the World Bank observes growth was higher in 2018 at 1.9% and more broad-based. However, it still fell below the population growth rate, government projections, and pre-recession levels. Planning for the rapid population growth remains paramount for policymakers, and already government is insisting on attaining self-sufficiency on all fronts, and the services sector now accounts for about half of the nation's GDP. Though the industry sector is also gaining grounds, inadequate infrastructure, especially power, is limiting potentials of the sector. Also of concern is the continuous delay in the passage of annual budgets, exacerbated by heavy recurrent expenditure and the present decline in oil prices. The federal government has made strides with institutional and governance reforms, including implementation of the Integrated Finance Management and Information Systems and the Integrated Payroll and Personal Information System. The enactment of the Secure Transactions in Movable Assets Act 2017 has institutionalized and widened coverage of collateral to stimulate lending to small and medium enterprises.
All right, thank you very much, Leah Khartoum Babatunde, for that background. We have with us in the studios the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, that's Hajia Zainab Ahmed. Hajia Zainab, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria again.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
And congratulations on your reappointment. We are seeing you for the first time since you were reappointed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're also going to have later on in the course of the conversation two of the regular faces on Good Morning Nigeria, professors of economics. First, Ken Ife, who is a development economist. Professor Ken Ife, pleasure to have you with us again.
Thank you very much.
And Professor Nazifi Dama, who is a professor of economics at the University of Abuja. Professor Dama, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, and good morning, Nigerians.
Yes, yeah, Kieran, I was just wondering, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the financial and economic issues, the Honorable Minister, in the first term of President Buhari, served in what was then known as the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. And later she was moved to the Ministry of Finance, a substantive minister, to which she's now been reappointed.
And actually, that's the area that we'd like her to start from.
Absolutely.
Now that the ministry has been expanded, I have budget and national planning, as well as the Ministry of Finance now into one. So these are now under your purview. Would you just let us know the import here and what are the advantages with respect to the issue of procedures and bottlenecks and challenges, or if you like, a bureaucracy that has to do with the process? Give us an idea idea of what it's going to be for you now? Because for the many Nigerians, is a big, a huge responsibility.
Well, thank you very much again for having me, and good morning, Nigerians. In the last dispensation, the President decided to have two separate ministries, Ministry of Budget and National Planning and Finance. The intention was to link budgets with plans, because in the past in the country we have had so many beautiful, wonderful plans, but somehow they were not being implemented. And to a large extent, the intention was partly achieved, but it was also problematic because there was a challenge of the implementation of the budget, and there was this variances between what was priority as seen by the Ministry of Finance and what was priority as seen by the Ministry of Budget and National Plan. Now, of course, the Ministry of Finance is the Treasury, so it always had the way because it was the one that was disbursing the funds. It created some significant strain, and the President decided to correct and revert back to bringing the Budget Office back to the Ministry of Finance, but also bringing the planning aspect together with the Ministry of Finance so that we can still maintain that positive trend of linking budgets with plans. The mandate is a very, very wide one. The remit is wide. So we have already studied what we need to do, and in the process of charting out how things will work between the planning side and the finance side. And you know, there's also a Minister of State that is responsible for supporting the ministry under the budget and planning aspect. So we have to work very, very closely together. But what is clear is that now the budget implementation will be done together. And also issues of tariff, as well as duties and waivers, that was also some subject of strain, can now be done seamlessly together. So my role is to make sure that the whole of these functions that are intertwined are well coordinated, and as much as possible there are no delays in implementation.
Well, but that's what you have said. There is a presumption that there was obviously a review of what went on in the first term of Mr. President with regard to the operational efficiency of Ministry of Finance as Finance and then Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Now that you have a panoramic view of both fields now under one, what are your priority issues?
So our priorities will continue to be guided by the country's medium-term plan. The ERGP is still very much relevant today. And also at the tail end of the last administration, we had been tasked to provide a roadmap for the next administration. So we prepared a document that had assessed and audited government policies, programs and projects, and then charted out what needs to happen in the next 4 years. Of course, the starting point was still the ERGP. So we did a quick midterm assessment of the ERGP centered around the impact of the ERGP. The study was done with focus on impact of each of the policies on households. It helped us to chart out what we need to do. But it's still clear to us that the priorities still need to be agriculture and food security, power, including petroleum as well as oil and gas, manufacturing and small medium enterprises. We also have alignment of monetary policy and fiscal policy. And each of these areas, nine areas, of course, including security, the fight against corruption, and then we added a special focus on housing and financing for SMEs. So each of these areas have specific targets and deliverables. During the retreat, that was our guiding document, and each minister will be given directive as to what KPIs they should be working towards. We should be getting that this week. We will review those directives internally and then sign up on a document that commits us as ministers to delivering on the KPI. So for the Ministry of Budget and National Planning and the Ministry of Finance, we'll have the responsibility of working with the Cabinet Secretariat to monitor the delivery of those KPIs that each minister has. We need to make sure that we stay on the path of the plan, because the issues are many. So each ministry is supposed to take some 1, 2, 3 key focus and really launch on it. For example, in agriculture, we must concentrate on maybe 2, 3 value chains and push them to the point where the agriculture is not just production, but also processing, processing consumed products as well as even export.
All right, Honorable Minister, let's still remain with you because your comment is allowing us to have a broader aspect of this conversation. By the time we move into the nitty-gritty, we'll be touching some of those specifics that you have mentioned. Yes, many steps have been taken in the last administration on economic recovery growth plan, which of course seeks to primarily diversify the nation's economy. There are other areas you raised, agriculture, and of course human capital development. But these are capital intensive priority areas that you have mentioned. Now, one wonders how the nation is going to grapple with the issue of revenue, of raising revenue, because of course many Nigerians are concerned about the rising debt profile of the country. So what are the sources available, through which the nation can have raise the kind of funds that we require to, of course, to put into those areas you've mentioned? Okay.
Let me step back a bit to say that the economy was really stressed to the extent that we went into recession, as reported by Leah in her presentation. But we have since then seen 8 consecutive quarters of growth. And it looks very much that this year, 2018, the GDP year close will be an improvement over the 1.9% of 2018. But we're very conscious of the fact that revenue is one of our biggest challenges. Of course, security is a huge challenge as well, but revenue is also a very significant challenge. When we designed the ERGP, the intention was to grow the economy by doing a lot of capital project works in areas of the economy that will increase consumption. And that was what helped us to pull out. But we also planned to build out the selected sectors using borrowing because revenues were low. Remember that there was a time that crude oil price was as low as $30 per barrel. So it was a conscious design that we will borrow in the first year, in the second year, and on an incremental basis. And by the fourth year, the borrowing will begin to decline. So if you look at the MTEF, which will soon release, and even the 2019, the borrowing level has reduced slightly. But when you look at the one that we're working on now, it is still further reduced. We have, if you look at just the budget, our debt to GDP, our debt to revenue ratio is a very healthy one. But because revenues are underperforming, to the extent that 2018 revenue closed at 55%, we're under a very significant fiscal strain. So the directive of Mr. President is we must increase revenue and we must continue to reduce costs. In January 2019, the Ministry of Finance launched a strategic revenue growth initiative, which was meant at enhancing the revenue generating capacity of the country, identifying new revenue streams, and ensuring that there's more cohesion in the work between all the revenue generating agencies. Our target is to move from that 55% to 85% over the next 3 years. When we do that, the borrowing that we have now at about 21% of GDP is still a very healthy one. So the problem is revenue. It is not that we have borrowed much or too much. It is that we don't have sufficient revenues. So all efforts are geared towards enhancing revenue. We identified clear initiatives and assigned those initiatives to specific revenue agencies with clear KPIs that must be delivered.
Why is it that we do not have enough revenues? And what can be done to ramp up the revenue base of the economy and of the country?
Well, we have to become more efficient in our revenue collection efforts as well as in enforcement. Our tax to GDP ratio is still the lowest amongst our comparators at 7 to 8% of GDP. That is extremely low. The ERGP target was 15% by the year 2020. We're still at around 8%. So we have to increase taxes. We have to reduce the dependence on oil, even though that has started. But that has been achieved due to a combination of reasons. Oil price declines, so oil revenues are reduced. But also there has been some significant, steady, let me not say significant, steady increase in non-oil revenues. So we'll continue to work towards emphasizing increase in non-oil revenues, even as we try to still take advantage of revenues from the oil while we can, because oil is a commodity that will be fading away. So we have to maximize what we can from it as much as possible. So the oil sector also have directives of what they need to achieve.
I'm just wondering, Kieran, this is the debt issue is something that we'll return to because the Honorable Minister has given us perhaps a picture of the federal government's own debt stock. States also have their own indebtedness, and there are all kinds of obligations that are due going forward, and whether our revenues might be sufficient to meet those obligations when the call is made. But one issue, again, in terms of just broad-based philosophy of operating the economy, all our guests, and I'm sure we also had you over the course of the years on Good Morning Nigeria. What do you intend to do to ensure that there is a heavy and more effective and therefore efficient linkage involving fiscal, monetary, trade, and industrial policies?
Well, that is part of the targets that we have. We have been working closely with the monetary authorities, the Central Bank of Nigeria, but we have to even do more. Because as a consequence of the gap, you find the monetary authorities end up developing policies on even implementing some programs that ideally should have been done by the fiscal side. So we need to bridge that gap. And it may be because of not enough impetus from the fiscal side, that the monetary side is in some cases running faster than the fiscal. So we have to bridge that gap. And for me, we've been able to establish an excellent working relationship now with the Central Bank of Nigeria, and we will be working together to determine things that have to do with tariffs, that have to do with imports and exports, and also on the impact indices that have impact on inflation in the country. We'll continue to do that so that we bridge the gap. The good story is that the foreign exchange rate has moderated for quite some time now, and there is some kind of stability that has been attained, but there's still a gap. And that gap is one of the targets that we will need to bridge and to narrow as much as possible. From 305 official rates to 360, there's still a gap that we need to bridge.
All right. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Of course, we'll now have a good background into this conversation coming from the Minister of Finance, Budgeting and Planning. Now, let's come to Professor Kenneth. Professor Kenneth, you must have been monitoring the nation's economic trajectory over the years. We'll recall when we had a structural adjustment program, which was, of course, what many Nigerians felt didn't have a human face, as it were, during that period. But we've also passed through other economic, policies of the previous administrations. Now, you've listened to the Honorable Minister. We're talking about rising debt profile, we're talking about a poor revenue base and what have you. So what do you make of the priority areas that the Minister has mentioned vis-a-vis the possibility of the administration presently being able to manage a good economy?
Well, let me begin by congratulating the Minister on her appointment and the expansion of her portfolio. But I have to say that there are things that the Honorable Minister has said that are music to my ear. One, a tighter and more timely coordination between fiscal policy and monetary policy. She's pointed that out, and that has been a major item for consideration. Then, of course, she also talked about the review of the monitoring and evaluation that was done on the ARGP, but from the perspective of the households, which is not a bad idea. In fact, actually, nearly 80% of our GDP is on consumption. So it is right that they began from there. But it's by no means the only way out. I'm going to have to come to that. Then there's also the recognition of all this, she's on course. But let me begin by pointing out some fundamental weaknesses that we need to sit on top of, so that as we look at strategic opportunities which we have to lock down, it will be done in the context of what we think is the missing link. For example, our unemployment rate is many times more than the urbanization rate. When the unemployment rate is in the 20s, and one minister said it might even come to 30 in the next few years, then it means that urbanization rate is 4.66%. And urbanization rate is higher than the population growth rate, which is 3.2%. And then that in itself is greater than the GDP growth rate, which is around 2%. And the agricultural GDP is even less. Now that brings the vivid picture of the so-called time bomb, demographic time bomb. So you can see that.
Just go over that again.
Okay. What I'm saying is that the demographic time bomb we expect by 2030 is not even going to wait till 2030. We are looking at a population explosion, but the trajectory is that the unemployment rate is many times more than urbanization rate. Urbanization rate is 4.6%. Urbanization rate is higher than the population growth rate, which is 3.2%. What it means is that in the next few years, the population concentrating in the center will go from 50% to 75%. And then you have young people dominating there with no job. And then you come and have a population growth rate that is higher than the GDP growth rate, which means the poverty is going to continue to increase. And the agriculture, which is the core, which we're going to come to, is even growing lower than the GDP and all that rate. So it portends serious consideration. But there are opportunities. There are opportunities because when you have this China, US, global, has it got an opportunity for Nigeria? Of course, there's a huge opportunity for Nigeria to capitalize. You look at ECOWAS people coming in and saying Nigeria has to lead and become the banker of a new ECOWAS currency. That has massive economic implication. And it's good, but we will have to see how you lock it in. You look at AFCTA that has been signed. I like the way that it was delayed so that the president gets the message, and the president has got the message, and he is leading from the front. But we need to capture that. So when you're going to look at a new revision of our ERGP, which is the operative plan that we have, it's a short-term plan, and we also need to find a way of bringing in a medium-term plan as well, because the 2020 medium-term is gone. So now when you have to lock it down, you look at national planning. National planning, I'm trying to encourage them to look at bioeconomy as a new economy that has to be put into the ERGP plan. That could give us $50 billion in the next 5 years.
What's bioeconomy?
And I'll come to that, because under bioeconomy, you have bioenergy, biotechnology, biomedical, you have green economy, all of them. And they're all economies that are burgeoning, that are based on our natural economy, that will actually transform and remove the emphasis just on agriculture. But it's huge. Then you come to the National Assembly relationship with budget. I said, look, even though the administration has control of the two houses, don't forget what is the key contention between these two arms. Over the years, since 1999, they believe that they have a role to play in budgeting. Let us do participatory budgeting. Let's not take it for granted, because they've caused us so much damage. 4 years of seven months delay in budget affects consumption. Consumption is a huge proportion of our GDP. So let's keep that alignment tight. Make sure that the FSP, the fiscal strategy paper, is ready in June, July, and MTEF, and then deliver the budget in October, so that we can now go and ask the manager, the president of the Senate, deliver us our budget on January the 1st. So the economy returns in sync with the private sector spending. So we have this economy, we will give it the best that we can. And then also, the minister mentioned some agricultural value chain. Now, this is where the president has come out and is leading from the front. Apart from what the EIGP contains in terms of actions on that, the president says to the CBN, focus on 10 value chains. And so let's have the fiscal policy run at the same time with the monetary policy, because if you see, the monetary policy is on the driving seat on those 10 value chains. Funding end-to-end intervention from land clearing, land development, seed production, all the input, all the way to market. And also smuggling and dumping. CBN is getting involved in that. Fiscal policy must come through immediately so that they are all working together in addressing those. So whatever is done here has implications. Even safeguard measures may be invoked, even levy instrument may be invoked. All the punitive and action have to be seen to be coming from both authorities.
Okay, Professor Kenefe, thank you very much. Now, let's bring in Professor Nazif Idama. Professor Nazif Idama, look, the floor is open, as it were, for you to make your comments on what you think the priority issues should be for the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning. But I would like you to preface your comments with your regular talk about planning and planning and planning. You are an advocate of planning, and indeed you were a director in national planning. First, structurally, how do you see the merger, as it were again, of budget and national planning with finance, unlike when it was segregated 4 years ago?
Okay, thank you very much. You see, I have been, I am, and I will continue to be an advocate of long-term and medium-term national development planning culture. Because as a developing economy, competing with other emerging economies, the only way we can structurally orient our economy to be competitive is for us to have or revert back to the culture of planning. Because planning enables you to set your priorities sector by sector and then host those priorities on a long-term basis and horizon and isolate those developmental interventions that can be comfortably provided by the state and those that can be provided by the private sector. And our economy is a federating economy with 3 tiers of government. And I keep on saying, if the federal government achieve 100% excellence in terms of policy prioritization and planning, if the states and local governments are not carried along, then certainly there is a problem. And we have institutional mechanisms in the country that can provide a basis for such coordination, particularly the monthly meetings of National Economic Council and then the National Council on Economic Development, which is done quarterly. And you remember recently, as a member of the Board of Economists of Daily Trust, we had our usual meeting on a quarterly basis and we reviewed the economy. And one of the key issues we emphasized there is to be able to assert the independence of National Planning Commission as an agency established by law to provide overall coordinated framework of all developmental interventions, projects and programs. 1, alignment of policies and programs. 2, development of medium-term and long-term plan, and possibly take the Vision 2020 Economic Transformation Blueprint, which I am privileged to be part of, review it in a holistic manner, incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals and every other governmental policy program that we need to focus, so that let us have a 10-year minimal of national, long-term national development plan, and then break it down into a 5-year medium-term plan, just like we have the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th national development plan. And I'm sure the minister will agree with me and a lot of Nigerians that the golden years of Nigeria's achievement of sustainable development are those years when we have been implementing the medium-term 5-year plan after independence until it was truncated in 1985. So I think it's an opportunity to talk directly with the Honorable Minister, and I'm sure she's a listening person, and I think we can work together to make this happen, because certainly the delays that we often happen that often do happen at National Assembly is a manifestation of a problem. And that problem is because, as Ken Epe said, we don't have a participatory budget, we don't have a participatory planning culture. The reason why a lot of delay is experienced in the National Assembly is because members of the House of Representatives and Senate will want to incorporate projects that touch on the lives of their constituents and their representatives, and they are right. Now, if we have a medium-term national development planning culture, we could be able to incorporate literally every single local government need and want and prioritize it. So that at the end of the day, when budget is submitted in September or October, the only thing that will happen are two. Possible bayament because of inflationary pressures arising from the earlier costed program, and possible bayament because of exchange rate variation, and maybe to have reports from various ministries of the extent of implementation, so that within a space of 60, 90 days, the National Assembly can pass the budget, because the budget will then be an extraction from an already developed and costed 5-year National Development Plan, and that will solve a lot of energy, so that the National Assembly can concentrate its energy on providing institutional strengthening of existing institutions that are weak for the purpose of good governance, fighting corruption, expanding the scope of the economy. Number two, an economy is a function of what is done by its managers, either to remain static or to expand or to depreciate. Nigerian economy is controlled mainly by three institutions at governmental level: the federal government, the state, and local government. Now, I hope and pray with the coming of the second term of Mr. President, the one-day meeting that we usually have of National Economic Council honestly is inadequate. Let us have like 2-3 days, holistically discuss how can we expand the economic capacity to produce more and provide a basis of generating taxes, because our tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest among emerging economies, and that is not sustainable. With the rising debt profile, we are spending so much money on debt servicing, averagely 66 naira for every $1, 66 naira for every 100 naira we earn. That is not sustainable. Of course, the debt to GDP ratio is low, but the debt to earnings is extremely high. So we need to have realistic conversations around that. We also need to have realistic conversation about the costing of capital project in Nigeria at federal and other levels. Believe me sincerely, you cannot be able to attract the needed resources for public-private partnership. And that brings me to an issue. Our public-private partnership policy needs to be completely overhauled, because an investor is not interested in our faces or color. He is interested in where his investment will give him the highest return, but importantly, there are specific safeguards in the law to make sure that his investment is secured. We have extreme weaknesses in the public-private partnership law and policy. And I have said it, I am saying it, and I will continue to say it. Our economy, even if we are selling oil at $300 per barrel, cannot be able to provide the needed resources to fill the infrastructure gap that is over 3 trillion US dollars. So we need to have realistic conversation. How do we review the PPP policy? How do we review the law? How do we attract sovereign wealth funds that are especially in the Middle East? Sub-Saharan Africa, and Nigeria in particular, is a potential source of growth in the next 20, 30 years. But it all depends on how we are able to craft policies and programs in order to attract resources. Nobody in the world will joke with an economy of 200 million people with high level of consumption. We are a strategic country in the whole of Africa, and that is why there is likely to continue to be attraction from the Chinese, from the Europeans, from the Americans. But our level of attraction should be that can be able to bring productive foreign direct investment into productive areas of the economy. Venture capital foreign direct investment, we don't need it. What we need is foreign direct investment in agriculture, in industry. But you cannot be able to attract those until you have an alignment between the right policies, the PPP policy, a national plan, because it gives the country an element of predictability, macroeconomic sustainability, and proper direction, so that anybody that is relating with us will have a compendium of policies and programs that gives him an assurance that this is a country that is ready to go to the next level.
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Dama. You've really made a very key point. I mean, going by your postulations and that of Professor Ken. And I want to draw a line from your comments, and that has to do with the issue of a budget cycle in Nigeria. We wonder, many Nigerians wonder why, since 1999, the nation has not been able to get it right when it comes to budgeting. And that also brings in the issue of members of the National Assembly, who would want to be to participate in the budgeting and planning. Those who may wish to, have some projects of their constituents, taken care of and all of that. When we also know that in their constituency or their constituencies, we also have local government authority, we have a state government as well. And well, I'd like to bring in the minister here. Honorable Minister, you've heard about this issue of budget, and it is affecting the entire policy or fiscal, monetary, and whatever, or what have you, because the bottom line is that after budgeting, there should be implementation of the budget, and of course the result is a democracy dividend. Now, you now have under you planning, budgeting, and of course finance. How are you going to ensure that from now onwards that there will not be any bottlenecks or any kind of problems between the executive and the National Assembly with respect to returning Nigeria to the normal and not abnormal budget cycle?
Okay, so let me say that in the last dispensation, we tried to bring back the budgeting process to the January-December calendar. So it's not for want of trying. But we didn't have an assembly that was helpful. They were not cooperative enough. Yes, there were some delays, but if you submit a budget in October and it doesn't come back to you till about 6-7 months after, that is a problem. So we have now an assembly that is very, very helpful and very sympathetic, and we have agreed that we will complete the budget process and submit to the assembly by the last week of September. And we're working towards that. The MTEF process is well advanced. We had taken the MTEF for consultation to the last Thursday. We're working towards maybe the first FEC that will hold to take it to the Federal Executive Council, and then the MTEF FSP will be taken to the National Assembly. So we're trying to bring that back on course, because we recognize that even though government budget is just barely 10% of the GDP of the economy, but it acts as a very important trigger. So it affects what the private sector does as well. So we also have to incorporate, and we're trying to work towards preparing the budget on a consultative basis, so that we are engaging the leadership of the National Assembly. We've tried to do that, but the consultation still, because there wasn't much cooperation, still didn't yield the desired results. So, but we will be more and then we'll step down the consultation between from the highest level to maybe the chairs of the committees. In fact, that's what the National Assembly also advised, so that we get their inputs. But if you look at our national budget, you'll find that we usually provide a block amount that is meant for constituency projects on the service-wide board. If you look at it, for the past 3 years consecutively, 100 billion is provided. That is meant for the National Assembly members to decide as they will what projects they provide to their constituents at their own level. But during the budget preparation processes, we've also seen in the last dispensation an increasing trend of an increasing trend that sees a lot of projects coming into the budgets as prepared by MDAs. And if it was there was some surplus that was available to do that, it's not a problem. But it meant you have to. It meant scaling down on key government projects to provide resources. To the credit of the National Assembly, they have not been going so much out of the MTEF framework, except in the first 2 years where there was an opportunity to increase the crude oil price. But in the last 2019 budget, that opportunity wasn't even there because we all were conscious of the fact that the price was just too precarious to do that. So we still need to be sure that we bring in the National Assembly and get their projects even into the MDA's budgets during the budget preparation process so that we remain contained within the framework and we don't have, and it will save in terms of the time that the Assembly takes to review the budgets and prepare it for all of the necessary approvals.
Yeah, it's often said that getting the appropriation bill passed into an act is one thing. Budgetary releases to the MDAs are also a major headache. Why have we tended to contend with this issue and not overcome it? A number of MDAs can hardly boast of getting up to 60% of their budgetary releases. Those who get above 60 would know that it's a big story for them.
Well, short answer is revenue shortfalls. When you have been able to attain only 55% of your revenue, your capacity to implement the budget is greatly affected. But to be fair, implementation of the budget and the plans has greatly improved, to the extent that we used to sit down between finance and budget and planning to look at government priorities, knowing that the funding is tight, selecting priority projects to be funded. So in the past, it used to be quarterly releases. You just release money to MDAs. But for the past 3 years, we release funds for projects. So we ask the MDA, what are your priority projects? And the minister is supposed to sign on that to make sure we're staying within the priorities. They send it, we review, and then release is project specific. And there was also emphasis on infrastructure ministries. They would always, for the past 3-4 years, they were getting the highest proportion of releases. They had the highest budget, but they were also getting the highest proportion of releases. Agriculture also was very much getting a lot of attention, so is mining. But security continues to be important. Unfortunately, we still have pockets of challenges, so security also was important. The health and education sector, if you look at the trend also over the past 4 years, the releases have been on the improve. We got to a point when we identified, because of the revenue shortfalls, and we are not able to provide the operational funding every month, 12 months in a year, we identify some agencies that must get those funds. We call them critical agencies, and they include security and a few other agencies that we determine is vital that they must get that there monthly. So those ones get consistently 1/12 of their budget every month, and then the other MDAs in the last year were able to do 7 months. The year before that, 7 months, something like that. So as revenue improves, we also try to do that. Capital funding has always been by borrowing. So the funds that we borrow is channeled towards funding capital.
Yeah, the other issue, very important one, raised by our two guests here, one of course Professor Nazifi, has to do with long-term planning. ARGP will be rounded off by 2020, which is next year. Will the government contemplate a longer national development plan, so 5 years or 10 years, as advocated by?
We have to do a new plan. The Vision 2020 expires at 2020, so is the ERGP as well. So it's clear to us that we have to do a plan. So the moment we rest the budget with the National Assembly, the next major task for the ministry will be starting the process of a medium to long-term plan. During the consultative process, we'll agree as to what should be the period, but I like the idea of it being 10 years and broken down into 5 years. There has not been a time in the recent past when implementation of a plan has been vigorous. The ERGP was not a new plan. We reviewed the Vision 2020, we reviewed the Nigerian Infrastructure Master Plan, We incorporated the SDGs. In fact, we had an SDG check. All the 17 SDGs were taken into account, the needs assessment, and a number of sectoral plans that were in place. So we extracted from those and pulled them into the ERGP. And there was a strong implementation process underpinning the ERGP. We had the ERGP implementation unit that just concentrated on tracking the performance of the ERGP in the key sectors, and we want to be able to continue with that and even enhance it.
All right, Honourable Minister, thank you very much indeed. Let me return to Professor Kenife. You want to make a comment on what she said, or what, do I give you
react to
what she said?
Although the two things I really want to bring out is the mileage in closer and tighter fiscal and monetary policy interaction, and also react on the debt management. But I need to clarify the issue of the Assembly. I'm not a spokesman for the National Assembly, but I've talked to them. In many years, I've been interacting in this. I said to them, what is your problem? Their problems are, one, oversight function, and what that means when budget arrives to them. And we said, okay, I talked to national planning a lot. I said, give them quarterly review of the budget so that they have 3 reviews before your final budget arrives. And they only talk about so reduce what the interaction is at the point of budget delivery. And then I said, but you've got that report. Why are you not doing oversight? They said the money released. They're not releasing money for them to do the oversight. I said, okay, keep quiet. Now let's go to the next one. They talk about participatory budgeting. It's good that some money is being made available in the service-wide vote, but it has its purpose, but it's not enough. It doesn't answer the whole issue about participatory budgeting from their point of view. There is Senate and National Assembly, what's the Parliament, the other one, Senate and House of Assembly. They have a committee on literally every MDA, and that should be the point of entry. If their committees are in everywhere, why are those committees not interacting with you when it comes to budget selection and budget uplift to why are they not interacting? So what you do is that you create some money, and then it's winner takes all, and then they said, okay, we'll wait for you. When your budget comes, they will lay ambush. Yeah. So you now find that when you now have a budget that they should have 3 months to consider, they're preoccupied on budget defense, is dagger drawn. If they can't find a headway, they will raise the threshold and have more money on the budget and allocate. That is what we need to nip in the bud. Don't take them for granted. Because APC has majority, don't take them for granted, because if there's anything that we have learned from National Assembly, they don't want you to call them rubber stamp. They want to be involved ab initio. Now let's return to the key thing that I was looking for. If you notice in 2016, when there was a complete meltdown in our economy, the CBN had to face the unfaceable. They tried so many measures, macroeconomic, macroprudential measures, they tried capital account control, you saw the limitations. It's only when they turned to demand management that there was traction. So for their revenue dropping from 3.2 billion a month to 1 billion against a 4.66 billion request for Forex, they had to turn there. And I was saying to the Ministry of Finance then, not you, where is your support? Trade, industry. None of those policies were coming to aid. So we had, the difference is eventually when Madam came in, there was traction. Because I can see the fiscal policy for 2018-19 was responsive. It now begin to draw nearer to the 43 item now. But now, there's more that needs to be done. Even with the focus of the president on 10 presidential value chains, now you could see that GBN is working hard and then attacking it in a way that hasn't been seen before. We need fiscal to begin to come close. And I don't know whether minister may want to consider having a fiscal committee at some stage that meets maybe once in 3 months or once a year, so that there is coherence at that level and they are working together. I wouldn't even be surprised if at one point they may want to have a joint meeting between the fiscal committee and the bank monetary committee once, just to make sure that there's tighter alignment. But the impact of that is, now if you look at what CBN is trying to do, it came and opened the window, the CRR, that is cash reserve ratio window, opening 4 trillion naira to commercial banks to say, come and take this money is sitting with me, any zero interest. But the banks are not jumping up and down as we would expect to go and take that money, 8-9% interest at a longer term, 7 years and 1 year moratorium, I can see them jumping up and down to come and take money that is earning zero, their own money.
That has always been a problem.
I know,
yes,
but
why?
No, I want to tell you. I'll tell you what is missing.
Yes.
What is their alternative? They're going for treasury bills because they have no risk with treasury bills, and then they just go and offload the treasury. And when they go there and dump the money, they're crowding out private sector investment. Then the bank is also trying to do something about. CBN was trying to see how can I discourage these people from going to treasury bill. So they increased the loan to deposit ratio, LDR, to no less than 60%. But you can see, they already 22.5% is locked down on CRR. You have 60% you must lend to capital. And even CBN try to incentivize them by if we hedge more to capital, you get 1.5% uplift. That is 150% uplift. But fiscal policy has to come down, connect, because when the banks are running away from the risk involved in capital lending, fiscal policy should move in and look at how they incentivize capital-based lending, and then de-risk that side for the bank so that they can move their money. So you know that's the then on the debt management, and also the debt. It is true. I agree with the minister. Our problem, we have a very large headroom on external borrowing, without a doubt. The real problem is revenue strategy, that the revenue is failing. So when you come to the amount required to service the debt, is nearly 40% of the revenue, and the revenue is dropping. And what I say to the minister is this. Over the last 11 years, only 1.4 trillion naira has been collected from 122 MDAs. And you know, one of the good things that this administration did when they came in 2015 was they went heavily on TSA. And that started rolling in over 2 trillion. And nobody complains now because everybody likes that it is bringing in money. But this is the area that we need to focus on. Now, according to the law, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and there's the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, 80% of the operating surplus of these 122 MD ought to be into the account of the government. And then they play with 20%. And then later they reconcile in the end of the accounting cycle. If we get this tight, get this tight, it will reduce the amount of borrowing that we need to make, and then it will bring revenue.
Professor Ken, I don't know. You're talking about operating surplus. I hope you are also aware that a number of MDs also complain that they have virtually nothing else left to finance or fund their operations because the TSA swallows up virtually everything.
I think we're not matching like to like. The thing is, the TSA is what you have paid into the coffers. Yes. We're talking about what has not been paid.
Okay. But nobody pays
on a month-to-month basis. Let me tell you what happens in the current situation. What happens is that an MDA is business as usual. End of the year, they create two accounts. One account is to fulfill the righteousness to the FRC, another one to the auditor. And the two accounts don't talk to each other. But we're talking about month by month. That money should go in month by month. And not leave it, and they said, the minister said this, minister said that, another minister, and spend all the money.
What is interesting here is the fact that, we've come a long way as a nation in terms of planning, budgeting, implementation, and what have you. But at the end of the day, we discover that, look, nothing is really working the way that we expect it to do. Kenny Fair, in his, before this his comment, he talked about bioeconomy, biotech, and bio others. And I want to come to Professor Dama before we go on break, so that I don't lose my line of thought, that where is the role of science, technology, and innovation in all of this? All the sectoral plans, all the things that you have said here are driven by science, technology, and innovation. In Indonesia, I saw palm oil being refined into biofuel used in driving cars. And if you look at the Asian tigers, who are emerging, in fact, most of them are now developed, like Singapore, right? What did they do that we're not doing? All this issue of planning, budgeting, fiscal, monetary policies, and what have you, have not been translated into practical reality, that will change the course of our economic history. So, I mean, most of people watching us this morning may not even understand the terminologies that you professionals are using to even understand what you're saying. Yeah, but let's bring it down and see how we can do it as Asian Tigers did.
Sorry, sir, you didn't add your regular satellites.
Well, before I respond to this comment, I want to appeal to the minister passionately about one thing. Participatory planning and budgeting in a democratic culture is very important. I was privileged to be in the Indian Planning Commission 2011. For the last 8 years, India has been consistent with National Development Plan of 5 years. And usually, the culture there is that they usually have a medium-term review after the second year. By the third year, the Indian Planning Commission will initiate a process for the development of the next plan and is participatory to the lowest 600,000 counties in India. That is why the process takes a whole 2 years. They incorporate literally every need and then prioritize in a consultative manner. If we do that, the issue of allocating special money for constituency projects, we will eliminate it because we will incorporate every single constituency project or program desirous by the members of House of Reps and Senate, and we have a clean and smooth process and implementation. That is that. Now, secondly, your issue about innovation, it is extremely important. And let me give you an analogy to tell you, maybe to trigger an action on the part of the federal government. I was privileged to be at a program organized by Harvard University in Nigeria, together with Babatunde Fashola and some of his permanent secretaries and the existing governor of Lagos and his deputy. After the program, based on the role that science and technology has proved in terms of promoting entrepreneurship and innovation, particularly in Latin America, Fashola decided to constitute a committee of 12, and I was a member, and he called it Lagos Innovation Policy Advisory Council. We set off the policy framework, we agree on it, and he gave us money, and we identify 5 key areas of innovation that anybody in Lagos, whether he is a Lagosian or he is a non-Lagosian, provided he is living in Lagos, if he has any innovative idea that can transform Lagos in those 5 key areas, he will come and make presentation to us. From the money provided, we can give him grant from 1 to 5 million naira. And I heard that there is some element of move on the part of Ministry of Science and Technology to develop the innovation policy. And I was also now to be privileged and be working with the Tertiary Education Trust Fund and the National Universities Commission. They are also having like a collaborative effort toward promoting science, innovation, research and development, particularly in the universities, polytechnics and colleges of education, because for a long period of time, this country has not even talked about what we call the triple helix model. And that model is a model of collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the research institutions. So that if you go to most of the emerging economies, the research is demand-driven. If you undertake a demand-driven research, it can automatically be obtaken by a business enterprise, transform into a service or product, and that can be marketed. And that goes a long way in strengthening the capacity of the research institutions, polytechnics, universities, colleges of education, and then the government provide like a coordinated role and filling in the gap. And that way, it is possible for us to transform this economy and combat a lot of what we see as non-combatable into money.
Professor Dama, you've spoken so well, but on the policy aspect, I'm not asking a question right now, but I'm just to...
we don't have a policy. Let me preempt.
For instance, now, the automobile industry, for instance.
Yeah.
In Asian tiger countries, you cannot have a brand of car that does not have a factory in that country.
Okay.
But in Nigeria, I'm not sure we have the data of the brands that we have in Nigeria when it comes to automobile. But we don't have we don't even have assembly plant in the first place. But it is compulsory in China. For you to sell your car, you have to have a factory. Because that will, allow the younger generation of Chinese to learn that industry. So let's stop there when we return.
Yeah, Professor Nazif Idama and the other guest, Honorable Minister, thank you very much. The President is in Yokohama, Japan. You can be sure that the number of Toyota SUVs you have in Nigeria, you can't find them in Japan.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have all our three guests, Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Professors Kenife and Nazif Idama. We also have contributions from our viewers who have used our Twitter handle. You can see it on the screen there at NTA GML. Let's take those tweets now, Kirian. Akeju Olagbaju has this first tweet. The agenda for the Ministry of Finance should be to negotiate for reduction in bilateral and multilateral debts to help reduce the amount for debt servicing and increase capital expenditure and fund only priority projects that have multiplier effect.
All right, from Adekunle Olayemi, stability of our economy should be the priority in this tenure. And there must be controlled price in almost all goods being sold in the market. The exchange rate should be controlled properly, promoting local producers of goods and local farmers.
Abdul tweets, now the Honourable Minister should also ensure the evolution of development plans for the nation, as was the case in the past, and ensure implementation of such plans to the letter.
Now from Titus Monday York, he said, please, the minister should assist wherever possible to advise whosoever for the implementation of the minimum wage. Nigerian workers are suffering and living below the minimum living wage index. Please, Madam Minister, liaise with your colleagues to implement this.
Okay, Sonny Michael Amakoju, the agenda of this administration from inception has been on economic security and infrastructure. Perhaps our yearning hasn't changed either, as we want to see improvement in all areas mentioned, particularly with good economic policies that will stabilize our exchange rate.
Now from Akeju Olabaju, there are leakages in our revenue drive. There are many agencies generating revenue and still keeping it undeclared. There are overseas investments that are generating revenue, also the MTEF. I am sure if most of the leakages are plugged, deficit will be reduced.
All right, Kiria, those are the tweets that we have in the meantime. Let's return to the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Just while we were off camera, an issue came up, of course, triggered by what Kirian had said. With regard to the fact that in some countries you go, there are no Tokumbo vehicles. You can have pre-owned within the economy, but not the kind of flood of Tokumbo vehicles that we have in Nigeria, which leads us to a much bigger issue. Professor Kenife also whispered on that. What could possibly be the game changer in the way our economy runs? Because everything from purchases, financing of housing, and so on and so forth, people will complain that you hardly have mortgages. Mortgages are of such a short term that virtually, it is dead. So can we transition from a debt economy to a credit economy? Debt economy being, for the benefit of our viewers, cash and carry. I want to buy a car is worth, let's say, 10 million. If I don't have 10 million, I don't go to the showroom. Can we return to a credit system? In the past, there used to be hire purchase agreements or hire purchase systems that were operational. When you had building societies, you could also have reasonable mortgages. But because all your cash has to be in your pocket, it's quite a strain. Can we have a game changer in the financing of our economic transactions?
Well, thank you very much. We must build a process that enhances consumer credit, both for the purpose of acquisition of assets like vehicles, but also, most importantly, for us, homes. We have had an automobile policy. The implementation has been on for over 5 years, but it's not worked. Why? Because there's no demand. Because there's no demand, you will not find any good automobile company coming to set up in Nigeria. There has to be a demand, and the demand can be triggered by easing access to financing, so that you can go into a store and buy a vehicle, pay a percentage, and then the rest of it is covered by a financing facility, and that you'll be able to uptake a house without having to pay for the house or build the house from scratch yourself. Part of the priorities, the 11 priorities that we came out of in the retreat, is creating affordable housing, as well as putting in place a very good consumer credit system. So the fiscal authorities have to work with the monetary authorities to make sure that happens, and it's in place. One other thing, should I respond to the questions that I raised from the Twitter handle on the debt, recommending that we go and negotiate and get debt discount? Yes, that could be so. But for us, instead of going about borrowing, begging for debtors to reduce our debt, what we should do is to work internally to enhance our revenue potential capacity, not just by government, but by the whole of the economy. We have to become competitive. We have opportunities in the AFCFTA, but the AFCFTA is also a challenge if we are not able to quickly put in place policies and programs that will make our economy competitive. We will find our businesses being increasingly fizzled away by our neighboring countries. Also, the eco currency that is being introduced will also be an opportunity as well as a challenge. So we need to do more in terms of remaining competitive. On the minimum wage, the federal government is implementing the minimum wage from August, but that is just the minimum wage. We're in the process of negotiating with labor on the consequential adjustment that needs to be put in place for the rest of the service. So the workers that are on minimum wage on the federal government payroll, they're actually very few. They're very, very few, because a lot of services that will have been in that category have already been outsourced. So when we finish that negotiation, the consequential adjustment will also be applied. The states is a different ballgame. Each state has to negotiate with its labor on how they will implement this. We will continue to encourage the state to at least implement the minimum wage first, and then negotiate the consequential adjustment for implementation. On revenue leakages, in the SRGI that we launched in January, we have a number of projects that are targeted at blocking revenue leakages. One of the things for us is also enhancing the implementation of the TSA. We have more revenues that we can see, but our liquidity management is still not optimal. So we're looking at refining the implementation of the TSA to make us take the most advantage of that pool of resources. So you see the funds, but you don't really have access to eat all the time. I launched just before, a month before the last administration, a project that we call Project Lighthouse. It's an automated platform that is meant to pull data as well as enable us to do data analytics. What that is going to do to us is being able to track the performance of revenue on near real-time basis, as well as identify taxpayers, whether it's an individual or a corporate, by using data from different sources. So we have data pull from not just the TSA, but BVN, immigration, customs, FRS, all of it pulled together. So it enables us to do analytics and helps us to plan better, and also enhances our liquidity management.
All right, Professor Kane, please, very briefly, what do you know about the currency swap deal, with China? And I also wanted to speak to the issue of the planned the Africa free trade, and all that. So what should that portend the Nigerian economy?
You see, the currency swap is an opportunity, both for us importing and for them in China exporting, and vice versa. What it does is that it reduces the the premium that people would have to pay because you are going via dollar, or vice versa. The people quoting for you to import from China, they will add 10% because they don't know what the currency rate would be when the time they own your LC. matures. So they increase. So the fact about 20% is saved on both sides just because we are having a swap. But I think we need to take it to the next level. China is under enormous pressure right now that the tariff has gone up 10, 15%, 25%, and it's even going to go to 30%. And they have responded in kind last week to America. So let us take the opportunity that China presents right now. And I kept saying, I said, let's take a bold, mega $100 billion project to China and say, come and work with us. We're not borrowing the money. Bring this money into our export free zone. We have 34 of them. Let your people come and manufacture them here. We'll guarantee you 40%. And then, of course, the whole of Africa is now open because we are members, part of ECOWAS. But from here, you can re-export to America under AGOA. Zero tariff, zero trade. It's music for their ears.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Professor Kenneth, I'm sorry to jump in here. I mean, we keep talking about export processing zones. The example you just cited, get China to bring in 100 billion or 100 million. Is it not possible for the Nigerian government to also get China or whoever, the funds that, sovereign wealth funds that Professor Nazifi talked about, come and build 4 or 5 refineries in Nigeria?
There's no question about that. In fact, even telling why don't you say to the who is not here, Mobil, all the big oil majors are here. Why don't we say, okay, 5 of you, take 5 of the refineries, one. They will never allow it to fail because there's reputational damage. They are here for the long run. They will deliver those. But we've also tinkered with co-location of refinery with new one. And where is that? Then you have 75 licenses to oil people. And these people need only $100 million for a modular refinery to refine 20,000 barrels. But they can find that, but we can find the huge money we spend on fuel subsidy. So there are mismatches there. But we can go to the bottom of those. But I want to finish, please, by looking at this consumer credit, because consumer is king. When I went to UK in 1981, I saw it in action with Mrs. Thatcher. Consumer is king. Why is the ICT the biggest one here, not harassing us, not being a nuisance on our credit system? Because we are financing the ICT by credit. When you are buying their credit card, buying it, you are giving them credit. So they have more money than they need. And so they are not a nuisance to our financial system. In the same way, turn it to flip it over. If we have 17 licenses granted for car assembly and are struggling, it's because they can't see how they're going to sell the first 100,000 cars that they will make. They will sell first year, how they're going to sell second year. We have to have this consumer credit. And let's look away from the commercial banks, for goodness sake, and have independent lease financing and mortgage financing and hire purchase financing come in. Many Nigerians that have money abroad can actually bring it in if they have license to do lease purchase. Okay, explain to me, if the diaspora can bring $23 billion every year in this country, and you tell me as a diaspora sending in my money that I can put some of that in lease financing and if they give me license, you're talking about a different economy. I'm telling you that the case is made.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you continue to talk about restrictive trade, when you need to unlock the potential in the economy.
All right, Professor Nazifi, your thoughts briefly also on how we can possibly have a game changer with regard to financing consumption in Nigeria. Debt financing for our consumption, which is cash and carry, is virtually not taking us anywhere. How can we move on to the credit side?
Well, you know, the reality is that if you look at the structure of the economy can only provide what its capacity dictates. Now, we need to expand the frontiers of developing a policy framework to attract, just like Professor Kenife said, as much as possible money from diasporans. But the framework should be all-encompassing, transparent, result-oriented, and value-adding. And you see, consumer credit, as we keep on talking, is a two-sided issue. One, you have to create the demand, but at the same time, you also have to create the supply. But in creating the supply, especially, we need to look at national interest. It's not just about allowing people to import cars, but making sure that everyone that is interested establish an assembly plant that is in line with the presidential order on domesticating and promoting local content development. All other countries are doing something similar, so we have to first look at our national interests and trench it. But importantly also, the way we are financing capital projects, I want to appeal to the Honorable Minister to see how she can put on experts. Let us have a realistic discussion. We need infrastructure, but financing infrastructure using debt is not sustainable.
Okay, Professor Dema,
it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. So
yes.
We need to use public-private partnership. And finally, please, let us have a comprehensive audit of all abandoned government projects and see which of those can be financed using public resources and which can be financed by the private sector. So that at the end of the day, it will serve a basis of re-reflating the economy.
Thank
and
you,
expanding
Professor
the economy.
Dama. Let's now bring in the Honorable Minister, your final thoughts.
Well, just to say that Nigerians should be comforted with the fact that President Buhari has a second term and that his focus is still on growing the economy, on enhancing security and welfare of the citizens, as well as fighting corruption. So in all of these discussions, we have not talked about fighting corruption, and it features in so many different, in almost every area. So we need to continue to fight corruption, not just by enforcement, but by prevention. And to prevent corruption, we have to increasingly use innovation and use technology, so that even when you do a malfeasance, it is traceable. For example, in the budget process, we automated the process of preparing budgets. So if anybody does anything on the system, it's traceable. You can track, there's an audit trail of who has done what, and that has greatly reduced from the side of the executive the propensity to tinker with budget. So we will continue to work towards achieving the priorities that have been defined in the last retreat, and each minister will have targets that will be monitored and reported on, and there will be consequences. The President assured us that there will be consequences for non-performance. We also call on Nigerians to support the President in monitoring the performance of ministers.
All right. Okay. Well, this is where we are concluding this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. But first of all, let's appreciate guests this morning. Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Ahmed. It's been wonderful talking to you this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. And Professor Ken Efe is a developmental economist. Well, he's a regular face here whenever we're talking economy. You brought in some postulations that may be difficult to practice here from all indications, unless something else happens. Thank you for coming. And Professor Nazifi Dama is a professor of economics at the University of Abuja. Thank you, sir, for your wonderful insights to the program today.
Thank you very much, and may Allah bless Nigeria and give it lasting peace.
All right, so on that note, we would like to thank you for tuning in. Good Morning Nigeria returns tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kurian Umayo. Have a great day.